Welcome back to another episode of Strength in the Details. I am here with Spencer Arnold, head coach of Power and Grace in Atlanta. You're in Atlanta, right outside of Atlanta.
I don't claim Atlanta, but yeah, that's the closest major city. Yeah, we're outside of Atlanta.
Tell me the city.
Lawrenceville. Lawrenceville is
Lawrenceville.
where we technically are. Yeah.
Okay, Lawrenceville. Thanks so much for being on the podcast as we continue our coaching and leadership series. I'm really excited to jump into learning all about you and what you're doing over at Power and Grace. Before we jump in, tell people who you are. Kind of give us your backstory, how you got into this space of strength and conditioning.
Yeah. So, really long story short, I was the kid in high school that wanted to play every sport. Um, if they could cut me, they did. I wasn't very athletic, so really bad at sports. But I knew that if I was had any chance at like getting on the football field, getting on the basketball court, any of that, also if I was ever going to have any chance of getting a date, like I had to get in the weight room. And so I started living and breathing the weight room as a ninth grade boy. I weighed about 85 pounds my freshman year. I was about 5'2". I was a small, tiny, not very athletic kid, but I loved sports, wanted to be around sports. So found the weight room. I lucked out. My strength coach was Coach Stan Luttrell, who was the coach for Jenny Arthur. Got Jenny Arthur all the way to the Olympics and to the Olympic Training Center. So I legitimately lucked out, like walked in the weight room and that's the dude standing there teaching me the lift. So he and I actually saw Jenny the first time when she walked into his weight room. He was at a different high school and she walked in and I was like, Coach, like, that girl can do it. Whatever you're doing. He was like, oh, I know. Don't worry. And so I lucked out, but one thing led to another. I stayed in weightlifting, started competing all over the country in weightlifting, got to do a couple international things for weightlifting. About that time, CrossFit started picking up speed. And so if you knew anything about weightlifting in the early 2005, 2006 land, you were kind of a hot commodity because you can just, if you want to Google snatches CrossFit 2005, like you'll see. And so we were a hot commodity. We were very helpful. I ended up getting to travel all over the world, teaching people how to lift weights in CrossFit. Got involved with that way. All that was happening. I got a bachelor's in religion. I got a master's in Christian education. Those two worlds were like going opposite directions, right? I just thought I'm gonna go be a pastor. I'm gonna go be a preacher, something like that. I was in that world, and then at the same time, this like strength conditioning world was exploding for me. And so I'm running the weightlifting game. We moved back to Georgia. My wife and I got married early, right after college. Moved to Dallas for my master's, and had our first little baby girl, Emma Catherine, and moved back home to be near family. When I did that, I started working at a high school because I had a master's in Christian education. So I found a private Christian school that actually reached out to me, became their strength coach, obviously implemented the Olympic lifts, began learning and utilizing all these things that have been taught to me by all these strength coaches. And at the same time, the Olympic Training Center decentralized. And so all of the weightlifters in Colorado Springs were looking for coaches. I looked up a couple of really big names landed in my lap. I tried really, really hard to get them to go to another coach. Hey, you should definitely go check out these people in California. You should definitely go check out these people in North Carolina. I drove to North Carolina to introduce them to Travis Mash, be there with them for a few days to get them, Jordan Dela Cruz, Jesse Stimo, to go to Travis Mash. Didn't work. And so eventually they found a way, despite my best efforts, to move to Georgia. Started training here. Power and Grace was kind of born through that. And that's kind of how I landed where I landed. I've continued to be a high school strength coach. Now I work at a really high level private school outside of Atlanta. And at the same time, Power and Grace has grown. So I'm coaching Olympians in our second Olympics. Yeah.
That's exciting. And I think that most people that know you or maybe in your inner circle know and understand that you do have this faith. You're a faith-based person, very outspoken about it. How does that shape your I guess trajectory as a coach? How does that shape your philosophy as a coach?
I think maybe right out of the gate, the first thing it does, as far as faith goes, like I think it's a good reminder to me, just of how much I need help from other people. So I think more than anything else, like my faith keeps me humble. It consistently reminds me how depraved and broken I am. Like consistently reminds me how much I need community and need help to be able to do the things that are, I guess I'm gifted to do. I think without it, I would probably be an isolationist, do this thing. I'm Superman. Let's go. And so I think more than anything, it just reminds me that, man, Spencer, you're nothing special. Like you haven't done anything that it wasn't already given to you. And so in a lot of ways, I think it does that for me. It also allows me, I come from a really interesting background. And so it has been really good and helpful for me to be able to see the culture and the world through the eyes of faith. Because you were talking about, like, I came from down South Georgia. I was a down South Georgia boy, upper middle class white boy. So like I had a certain perspective and a certain viewpoint, and that is like what I grew up in. Between like the work of faith in my heart and in my life, and combine that with like, you're in Turkmenistan, you're in Thailand, you're in Uzbekistan, you're meeting all these people, different cultures, you're hearing different languages and ways that they view the world. Like, I just think those two marriages have made me see the world and experience the world in a really different way. It's made me really appreciative of different cultures. I think without those two things, I just don't know that. I think I could have been very easily pegged as like the stereotype that everybody thinks about. And so I think in a real sense, like it's changed. My faith forms how I view people. It forms how I view my own self, and lets me love and care for people a little differently.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I heard is that it kind of shapes how you view the world. And I think that sometimes there's this like misconception that, the world views people of faith in a certain kind of way, in a certain kind of box. In what ways, if at all, has your faith conflicted with the sport of the strength and conditioning culture, as you probably well know and can describe?
Gosh, so much of this of sport in general can just be about you. Like it's you on the podium, it's you in the spotlight, it's you by yourself. Look what you did. Look how great you are. Like it can be so like so, and I'll just be straight. Like it is impossible to battle that rightly every single day. Like I need people around me to be like, Spencer, like is that really the move you want to make right here? Like that's it. That's the move. But otherwise, like I'd find a way to make a sport where I'm not even on the platform. Somehow I'd make that day about me. Right. Like it's just, sport is just so idol-like in a way. Like we're going to create, worship idols, right? Like whether it's a gold medal or our favorite athlete, like it is just so much of that. And I think for me, my faith has reminded me that, man, you're not as much as you think you are. Everything you have was given as a good gift. Be thankful, be humble, man, find a way to make this thing about somebody else and something else, because one, it's far more joy when you do it as a community of people. Like, how much more joy is there in a Power and Grace as a community going to Paris, right? Like that is so much more fun when it is a group of people who love each other and care for each other, rather than it's about this one guy, or this one girl. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's helped create unity. In places there wouldn't have been unity. It's helped create humility in places there wouldn't have been humility. And there's been a lot of I think there's been I think there's a willingness for us to be able to say, like, man, I messed up here. I messed up here. I remember apologizing to a high school girl that I messed up her count at the Arnold. It's her first national meet. And I messed it up. And I think she was so naive to what was happening. Like we could have just glossed right past it, but she didn't get to take a shot at a PR, and that was really my fault. And I just did there. Then the faith inside of me, like I didn't feel right to let her take that as like she messed that up, and so it forced me to look in the mirror, see my own depravity, see my own brokenness, look this little girl in the eyes, and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. Like I did this.
Yeah,
I messed this up. You did a great job. I promise you I'm not going to do that to you in the future." Those kinds of things. It forces that type of humility, which I think, man, people respect and love that, and drives people together.
That's some of the same humility that I heard when I spoke with Jordan on the episode with her, and not in the same, sense, but in this idea of community, and this idea of, I am, this is an individual sport, and, we train together, and we have coaches, and we have support people. And at the end of the day, you go on the platform and it's just you. But when you step back off that platform, there's the community again, right?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we can take that for granted. But that was one thing that I heard in my conversation with Jordan, was that there's this idea of community, and I think it starts at the top. And so my question for you is, as you're cultivating this community, how do you, not necessarily push your faith on anyone, because I don't think that that's the type of person you are, but how do you help bring athletes of all walks of life into that community?
Yeah, I don't, it's not, I wish, I wish I could write a book on how to like create a community like we've done, but I don't know how we did it. Like, I don't know. I don't have the 3 steps to success for you. Like, I don't have any of that. Like, I think just like, really and truthfully, I got some people that came to be a part of our team very early, before Jordan, before Jesse, um, that bore with me as I learned the hard way. Like,
Mm.
that labored and persevered and endured patiently my faults and my failures, and are still doing that. And like, let me make those mistakes and didn't abandon. Like, they stayed with me. And I could go on and on about CC Kyle. And that woman,
I love
like,
her.
Power and Grace Performance exists because she stayed with me when I gave lots of reasons to not. And she just like bore with me and was patient with me. And so I think in a lot of ways, man, if I were going to tell people, like, so much of this is about making sure that people join your team that match that kind of like, hey, we're in this knowing that we're all kind of messed up, and we're all gonna mess up, and we're gonna mess up together and do this thing
Hmm.
together. And when we mess up, we're gonna offer a lot of grace. We're gonna offer a lot of forgiveness, and we're gonna recognize that nobody in here is perfect. And and so I think Power and Grace attracts those types of people because early on, to no credit of my own, those are the types of people that walked in my door, and bore with me and teach me things, and helped open my eyes and helped me to see things, and had me read books that I wouldn't have read. I remember reading a book CC gave to me and threw that thing across the hallway. Like, I hated that book. But as I read it, I was like, man, it is so right. Like, I need to read this book. And so I think that in a lot of ways, just community is a reflection, not just of the guy at the top, but it's a reflection of the original like purpose that was set for the community. And I think for us, like, we were just lucky. We had some people that um, man, we're really intentional about choosing patience, choosing grace, choosing forgiveness, and not expecting perfection from the first step in the door. And we've got a whole group of people who are in it because we love each other, not because we love the results.
Right. I want to go back to, you talked about how you got these initial athletes came to you, and you kind of tried to stay away from it. Ultimately, what motivated you to get into coaching, and I guess eventually coaching at such a high level?
I started coaching from the jump. I mean, as soon as I was 18 and I like was working at a CrossFit gym, I started coaching. I remember coaching weightlifters at local meets from the very beginning, right? I just had really good coaches like CJ Stockel, Stan Luttrell, Ursula Papandrea. Like, these people invested in me, and I knew that I had been given a lot. And so it was my responsibility to kind of return that back to a community that had given me a lot. Um, and so, I mean, to some degree, I knew I was going to be doing that. It was a local level, right? Like, people who were at the CrossFit gym and wanted to do some weightlifting meets, I'd take them to a weightlifting meet and coach them up. We had some people get out of the local world and make it to nationals, and that was great. And I remember that happened. I remember I met CC, and I did a seminar in Mobile, Alabama, and she was doing the seminar. And I remember watching it. It was a CrossFit. I mean, it was a weightlifting seminar in a CrossFit gym.
Hmm.
And I remember watching her move. I'm like, girl, whatever you think you've been doing, you're done. Like, weightlifting is the goal for you. And now she's been to world championships and, set all the records and all that mess. But she was like the first one,
Hmm.
but it was kind of us together. Like, she hadn't done anything and I hadn't done anything, so we're going to do this thing.
Hmm.
And so I think in a lot of ways, like, weightlifting coaching embedded in me early because I was an athlete and coaches were investing in me. And so in some ways, I just wanted to be like them. They gave me a purpose, and I wanted to continue to do that. I think when really legit weightlifters, not that CC wasn't legit, but she wasn't legit when we started,
Hmm.
but like man, people start reaching out to you, and the last place they were at was at the Olympic Training Center. It's a different kind of scary, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Delacruz wants to join your team, wants you to coach her. Her name really a team, right? Like wants you to coach her, and the next step for her is junior world championships or the Olympics. Like, you know, like you gotta. I just know I don't know that I was like I don't know that I felt prepared. Nor was I, right? Like I don't know that I was, but like you're not going to learn unless you step into places where you feel unprepared.
Right.
And so, I think that was what my original thing was like, Spencer, you're not qualified to do this, man. Like somebody else is. Like there's some people that have done it and have great communities and are good, right? Like you're still learning, and so that's why I think I tried to push them to other places. Even when Kate joined the team, right there before Tokyo, I mean, I probably called 12 coaches and walked around our track at the high school, just walking. Should I do this? Are you sure I can do it? I don't know if I can do this. Like she's incredible, you know. And so I think like, yeah, I got into coaching because I really just love the sport, and I love seeing people do things in the sport that maybe they didn't think they could do. In a real sense, these really high level ones, we've developed some now. Like now we've developed some from scratch to that level, but back then, oof, I was scared. I didn't know I was ready. I didn't think I was ready.
I think that's a lesson for newer coaches that are listening. We don't become coaches and all of a sudden we feel that we're qualified or we're ready or we come in with all of this knowledge. It's a learning game, and we all have that first athlete that we get to develop from scratch, and we get to see them grow and progress, and we make mistakes, and they'll always be that first athlete, right? And then you kind of learn as you go. But I think that's a good lesson for coaches that may be listening to this, that you gotta have to just put yourself in the position and trust that you have a foundation, right? And that you can kind of build on that foundation. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you share, is that you had a foundation of strength and conditioning, and then kind of learned as you went.
Yeah, I mean, lots of it was picked up as I went, and I think what I didn't realize, if I go back and tell that kid, hey man, you got a lot of coaches who are willing to give you everything they got, and they did. Anytime I had a question, I called a community of great coaches, and they invested in me. I remember being on calls with coaches, and they'd say something, and that would keep me up till 4 a.m. trying to figure out how they do that. And like, I mean, Sean Waxman has sent me about more rabbit holes, me trying to figure out tonnage and intensity than anybody. And so, I think in a lot of ways, I didn't realize how well resourced I was from a veteran coaches who cared about a kid who was just on his way up, and I think if I go back and tell that kid, I just look in the eyeballs and be like, dude, just take your shot. Like, do it everything you got, do it the best of your ability. If it falls through, it falls through. It didn't. It's not going to fall through, right? Like, I learned a lot about myself in that process too. Just like, man, if you just have like this relentless work ethic and you're willing to be humble enough to ask people questions, like, you'll figure it out.
So let's talk a little bit about programming for high-level athletes, and in what ways would you say it's similar or maybe different than programming for an intermediate or maybe a recreational level athlete who's not interested in competing?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that are the same though, right? Like it's your job and responsibility as a coach to care about the things. I care about certain things are to be cared about no matter whether they're just doing a local meet and they want to do local meets for the rest of their life because they love it. That's a big responsibility. I mean, think about those words, right? Like, I'm 32 years old and I want to compete in weightlifting for the next 30 years.
Mm.
Like, that's in a lot of ways harder to do than it is to get a 25-year-old to the Olympics and then let her retire.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to create a type of programmatic design that lets somebody be in the sport of weightlifting for a longevity. That's very, very hard. In order to do that, you have to take care of the details. Like, you have to care about their intensity and their volume and their tonnage, and you have to pay attention to what causes them to be overtrained and what causes them to undertrain. And you have to take those notes and then recognize that 5 years ago, they're not the same person they are today. And so whatever notes you had 5 years ago probably ain't true today.
Right.
Oh, wow, they bought a house and now they got a kid and things are different. And so like having all those notes just serves as like a backdrop for you to like continually be actively involved in adapting a program to where they are in their lifestyle. But if you don't have those things, like you're not tracking the basics, like you're not you can't do that for the course of a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's for me, like there are some things that will always be the same, no matter where the lifter is, no matter their goals, no matter no matter what they're chasing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm gonna track those basic things: intensity, tonnage, volume, right? What kind of top end percentages are we hitting every week? That kind of stuff, always. And I'll have years and years of that data so that you can always refer back to it. I think where it gets complex with elite level lifters is the more elite they are, meaning the greater percentage of their body weight they're lifting, the greater percentage of the world records that they're lifting, and the higher percentage they are as far as elite in the world, the more you have to you can't tell them you're not focused on big rocks anymore, right? You're not even focused on little rocks. Like you're focused on molecules. And so for Jordan, a great example, like we're looking at centimeters of movement past her knee, like a couple centimeters past her knee. I need the bar to be in a certain place because that's the difference in an 89 and a 91 kilo snatch. With Jordan, I'm looking at newtons of force applied in an isometric pull, right? And I need it to be 1,500 newtons versus 1,400 newtons. And so the data gets more minute and the data gets more specific, and the way that you collect and track that data gets more complex. So force plates get involved. Those kinds of you start using readiness tests on jump mats. You start leveraging velocity based training tactics with a lifter. Not that they're less important, who's chasing a local meet for a PR, and that PR is going to total out to be like the total is going to be less than their body weight. That the rocks are bigger there, and the room for error is bigger. When they're snatching more than their body weight by a lot, by almost double
as a warm up.
When you're snatching your body weight as a warm up, and you're potentially touching double body weight snatches as a female, like minutia changes everything. And so I think it isn't necessarily what we're looking at. It's just to what degree are we hyper focused. I'm not going to hyper focus on a little tiny detail with the lifter who's trying to snatch, with PR and snatch still 10 kilos under their body weight, right? Like, not that it's less important. It just, they have big things that we need to get before we look at little. And so that's kind of the difference in elite and non-elite. And we don't really have a hierarchy from that perspective. Everybody's the same in our program, and I treat everybody the same and all of that. But you cannot program the same for an Olympian as you do someone who's competing in a local meet, for sure.
You talked about velocity-based training, and I think that's something that I think the term is thrown around a lot, but I don't know that people really understand what velocity-based training. Could you briefly share what that is and maybe how you're using it in your gym?
Yeah, so VBT, first of all, it's not a new thing. It's gotten some publicity in the last 5-6 years, and everybody thinks it's the new hotness. Man, Louis Simmons was doing it way before the internet. And so it's not a new hotness. And Nintendo units have been around. I mean, if you look at some of those Nintendo units, they've been around since the dinosaurs, right? So it's not a new thing. It's just gotten popular because technology started to make it more accessible and more verifiable. VBT is essentially and I'll say this before we ever talk about a device or any of that, like every strength coach, every weightlifting coach, whether they know it or not, is a velocity coach. Like they are programming a specific velocity every time they write a percentage down. The difference is, do they know what velocity they're training? Do they know if they're getting that velocity when they write 80%? That's the only difference. Like every coach is a velocity coach. Some are ignorant of it, and some of them are doing it on purpose. And it's become more purposeful in the last 5 years because the technology has become more accessible and easy to use. We use it. I use it in 2 places. We have 16 perch units in the high school. Very blessed. I would say to my knowledge, I don't know of any more equipped high school from that perspective in the country. So everything we do in the high school is, if it's a strength lift or it's a pulling derivative, we're using a velocity based training. So I'm not programming 5 sets of 3 at 85%. I'm programming 5 sets of 3 at 0.4 meters per second. And so that lets, because high school kids, in case you're unaware, like they're just a little unpredictable, like a little bit. So they might come in because they were up Snapchatting their girl till 3 a.m. and all this, and they might have a great session. That's what's crazy. Like they might get 2 hours sleep and be firing at all cylinders, and our velocity will regulate them up for that. Basically, 0.4 meters per second is heavier than it would have been otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, or they were actually up studying physics, really, like actually studying physics. They come in dragging, or like the classic example, right? Like their girl, you know, didn't hold their hand or something on the way down to the weight rooms. Now they're down, like having a bad day. And so 0.4 meters per second is a little heavier. And so it lets me regulate for the teenage hormonal body a little better in the high school. And it also gives them goals like, hey, I need to see 0.4. You can go as heavy as you want as long as I see 0.4. So it gives them velocity. The two things it does better than anything else is it auto regulates for your training based on how you feel that day. And it gives you the ability to lift with intention, like to chase a specific goal. In the weightlifting world, I don't use it for the Olympic lifts, and I don't use it for the Olympic, for the full lift, like snatch and clean and jerk. I don't use it. One, because like verifiably objective evidence shows you that you can actually move a bar faster doing it poorly than you can move it if you did it with clean technique. So I can create more horizontal force on a barbell, which will then show as greater speed, even though I'm actually swinging the bar away from me. And so I've seen people miss lifts. They're actually moving faster than if they were to move it the right way. It moves a little slower, but it's more accurate, and they make the lift. And so we do not use it. We don't use it as a readiness test. I don't believe in it. It's wrong. Like, just you can't get behind it, especially if they're not like perfect in their technique. We do use it on the Olympic side with all of our squats and all of our pulls. And basically, again, regulates for our lifters. But at the same time, like if you're a weightlifter, when do you do your pulls? Like, they're always at the end of the workout. You've done some crazy snatch balance. Now you've snatched heavy. It's hot. Like we live in Georgia. We've been in here for an hour and a half. Like I'm dying. The last thing I'm going to do any sort of like actual intention on is my pool. I'm just going to do my pools. I'm going to get them done and move on with my life and find somewhere air conditioning,
Yeah.
Well, if I tell you to do your pools, but there's a perch in front of you turning red because you're not moving them fast enough, like we got enough type A's in weightlifting that they don't like failing. And this tells them they're failing. So it forces people to use intention in their pulls and in their squats when they might just be something they're trying to check a box on. And so in a lot of ways, it helps us develop a little more force development, especially helps us get a little more rapid force development. And that's kind of what we're looking for, is if you can just do it or you can do it for a purpose. And in a lot of ways, velocity-based training helps us be intentional with the purpose when we do those lifts, especially if they're ones that they were just like, and move on,
Unless you're me, and sometimes I will program heavy pulls at the beginning of a workout for different
You're
reasons.
crazy.
But
I get why you would do that. My lifters would think I would mutiny. They would be like, "Nah, I'm out."
yeah, I've actually had people.
Watch me switch them.
I've had athletes text me like, "Hey, there's a typo in the program," and I go, "No, there is not. There is
Not a
none.
typo.
That is in on purpose."
Yeah.
How do you progress velocity based training? How would you maybe progress that? Would it be over a period of a week, a month, a training cycle? What does that look like?
Yeah, again, different strokes for different goals here. If I'm a high school football player, I'm going to have you live in certain zones based on what the seasonal demand is. So they're going to spend more time in accelerated strength, 0.5, 0.75. As we get in season and deeper in season, I'm going to undulate out of absolute strength more often. They're going to be in absolute strength, so 0.5 or to 0.3 or so, a little less often in season, probably on bye weeks or on lighter games, games that aren't as big a deal. And then I'm going to pull them out of that and put them into more speed emphasis on games that are a big deal, so that they're a little more power oriented rather than force oriented. I'm going to help literally shift their output so that it's more power centric in the way that they perform on the field. And so that's kind of how I do that. If we're in the off season, I'm going to spend more time in absolute strength overall and use accelerated strength as a deload.
Okay.
In some ways, maybe even speed strength. So like we might get above 1.0 meters per second if we're really trying to deload. But for weightlifters, the goal is we don't progress like that. Like weightlifters have to lift certain weights. Like that is the game. Like you can't tell a football player, "Hey, we're going to deload you to this. We're not going to tackle." Like what? You're going to tackle. Like you got to. Same thing in weightlifting. Like you got to snatch and you got to clean and jerks. Like you're going to lift certain weights. So you can't just like regulate out of that. And so what we use velocity training for them is more so to see progress. Like hey, I moved 140 back squat at 0.38 meters per second. If I do that 140 again in 8 weeks, am I moving it faster? And so we're a little more focused on seeing certain loads progress in speed or not progress in speed because we're doing we're chasing something else. So it's a little more looking at like how the bar moves under a certain load that we look at with weightlifters, because we would love to see weights that were moving at 0.35 meters per second move at 0.55 meters per second close to competition. You should see that increase in speed at a consistent intensity rate, like consistent load. That rate of speed should increase as you get closer to competition. So that's a way for us to kind of gate check ourselves and see if that's actually working. You take that data and you combine it next to force plate data, combine it next to readiness data, and see the whole picture of like, are we actually creating this? Like, are we actually creating the adaptation that we want? And if we're not, what's wrong with the stimulus? And so it lets us every 3 or 4 weeks or so look at and see if there's like objective proof of growth.
So in other words, for athletes that are listening to this, there's more than one way to measure progress. And it's not always a 1 repetition max, because when you get at these higher levels, I mean, you're fighting for 1 kilo on the bar. So I always try to get athletes to understand that there's more than one way to measure.
There's just so little value in a 1 rep max back squat for a weightlifter. There's just so little value for that. Like the only reason we do it is because they set a personal goal of hitting a certain number. That's like the only, like they have an emotional connection to a certain number, right? Like, okay, I'll let you roll on it because I'm not a fun sucker all the time. And so like, I am going to let you have that one because it's a good emotional boost. But like, there's just so little value to true 1 rep maximal attempts in the squats and in like a deadlift and weightlifting.
I typically let my athletes max out deadlifts once a year because for some reason that matters to them, and they hold on to that number for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, like there are cycles where it makes sense and I can let them get a 1 rep max back or 1 rep max front, right? Like you have to also think, like Jordan and I are kind of figuring this out right now. Like this is the strongest she's ever been in her whole life and may never be this strong ever again. Like, do you want to take the shot? You know, like, do you want to take, what is the goal? If you always want a 150, well, let's put it on the bar if it makes sense. Let me see if I can arrange some things because like that's, like that feels important. It's not really, but like it feels important. And when you've been in this game with a girl like that for a decade, whatever she cares about, you care about. And so like to some degree, emotions do drive. Sometimes we let ourselves do that because you can't disregard like emotional connection to things like that.
Absolutely. Let's jump into the mental game of this because, you've experienced a lot of success developing Olympic weightlifters. And, for those that don't understand what happens in the back room and, the weeks and months and years leading up to something like Paris Olympic Games, they see the 6 lifts out, out on the platform. What have you learned about the athlete-coach relationship that has elevated the achievements and the success and maybe even the mental preparation of athletes?
I've said this, and this is a newer thing. I think Mode has taught me a lot. Mode is obviously a gold medalist from Canada. Like she's as accomplished as they come. She won a gold medal at the Olympics and in Tokyo, and then called me to coach her. So like, all right, Spencer, the best thing you can do is match what she's already done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was my thought when I saw the phone. I was like, well, good luck. Like the high chance is you're not as good as she previously was, like pretty high chance. But then talking to her in that initial conversation, she said, hey, my goal, I could care. She's like, I think she said I could get 9th and I wouldn't care. She's like, I just want to go to the Olympics again. I want to represent my country and I want to do it with my friends and family with me. And I want a coach who doesn't feel the pressure to get a gold medal. And that was like really helpful and really transformational for me about like, why do me and an athlete approach this thing? What are we chasing? Jordan has always kind of told me like, hey, remember, we as athletes are not just like medals and podiums. Like this is a we're people. But I think this specific quad with Jordan and with Mode and with Kate, and with Sarah, like all these people that were really either chasing the Olympics, had a real shot, or like are in the Olympics. I think I began to realize that like the better they are, the less they actually need me. So like, I was Mode's first competition. For those who don't know, like I'm an American coach. Canada does not let me coach her. Like in competition, I'm not allowed in the back.
Mm.
So, I had to trust David. David's one of our coaches who is Canadian. I had to trust David to take this athlete that invested so much in her training and has very invested in her performance at the World Championships in Colombia. I had to trust David. You were talking about learning lessons. Like I did not. I didn't. I mean, he would be great to have him on this podcast right now because I'm like trying to sneak over and watch Lit. I'm like trying. She can see me. She can see my facial expressions. I'm like this. Like all that's happening. She can't communicate. It's a mess. Awful. And it came to a head at the Pan Ams because she did poorly, and I knew, and I could see it. She could see it. It wasn't good, but I couldn't involve. The more I got out of that way, like the more I got out of it, the better she did. It wasn't that I'm not important. It's just that like she's a really qualified athlete who's experienced and could do this thing without me. And why that's important is because these athletes, they're so good at what they do and they're so experienced that they don't need somebody to hold their hand through it. They choose somebody to hold their hand through it. And when that clicked, that these athletes could do it without you as a coach, or without you as a sports psych, or without you as a dietitian, or without you as a high performance director. They could do it without any of those people. They don't need them. Mm-hmm. That they choose those people, like feels like such an honor and such a privilege to get to be chosen by these really incredible athletes to be a part of their like journey and a part of their story and a part of this process. And so I think when that flipped for me, that if you do your job as a coach well with an athlete you've had for a long time, you're essentially working yourself out of the equation. The better you are at your job, the more they begin to understand your program and can replicate it and can guess what you're going to write, right? And the more that they know what they need to do when they get inside 6 weeks, and the more that they can replicate performance because they've done it with you, and they're just going to hit, rinse, and repeat on these things that worked and not do the things that didn't. You two have done all these things together, and the more you've done it, the more they've learned. And the more they've learned, the more they don't need you to teach them. And that you become less and less necessary and more a desire, like a thing that like this becomes less and less of like coach and athlete and more of like friend that are doing this process together because we choose to, because we started it together and we can't wait to do the rest of it together. And like, it is much more of a partnership. I've always said that the best coach athlete relationships are not transactional, they're transformational. And who Jordan is today and who I am today are very different than we were 8 years ago. And I think that's because of that relationship. Mode has taught me a ton in 4 years. Sarah's taught me a ton in 2. Kate, I mean, good gosh, does that girl taught me more than I ever thought I'd learn from her, and going through this past quad with her. And so much of it is like you learn from each other, and it's not learning like whether or not I get their knees back or not. Like
right.
You're learning how to like interact with somebody and be in a relationship with somebody that lets them flourish and care about them more than you care about your own self. Like those kinds of things only happen through long relationships with athletes, for sure.
There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into being a coach, and there's a lot of sacrifice on the athlete's part. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective on how the athlete and coach relationship kind of transforms. And 8 years, in the span of a sport age is an eternity,
It's an eternity.
So
they don't see, right? Like people who see these athletes on the play stage, they don't see. They don't see the walks that Jordan and I have to take because we're mad at each other and I hate each other's guts. Like they don't see the tears from an athlete when they're crying because they're terrible at the sport and the life's over. And I'm like, you're a gold medalist. Like you're not bad at the sport. Like they don't see that. Like they don't see that like for months you and your athlete might not be vibing. And something will click and you are. They don't see that for months you've done everything you can to try and fix this thing and it's not fixing and you're frustrated and you don't know what to do, and you take that out on the athlete sometimes and they come back at you, and then there's like this period of y'all trying to figure out how to do this as a relationship. The better the athlete gets at the sport, the more it is relationship focused and about the two of you figuring it out together than it is about you telling them what to do. Like,
Right.
they just don't see all the crap in the gym that is far more than, I think we should increase our intensity by 3% this week.
Right.
Like, yes, those things are important, and not skipping workouts are really important. But like, gosh, if you don't have a great relationship with your community and a great relationship with your coach, like, it doesn't. It's far less important.
And the stuff outside of the gym, because to your point, and maybe something that Jordan said was, athletes are humans, right? So they're in the gym, but they also exist outside of the gym. They exist outside of sport. And I know Jordan is in school, and so many athletes that I have had the privilege of coaching are parents or students or spouses, partners. Things outside of the gym impact what goes on when they come in and grab a barbell. And, I always find myself being the coach of the programming, but also the coach of, helping you be the best person that you can be. And I think that that's also a really important role of the coach.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That was another, you want to talk about athletes that bear with you. You don't learn that, probably don't learn that I certainly did not learn that except the hard way.
That's
That
the only
life
way to
outside
learn
of the
it.
gym. Yeah. And there are places for me as a coach to be involved in things outside the gym. And there are places for me as a coach to let that athlete figure that out without you. Or maybe they already got it figured out and you're just messing it up.
True.
And so, again, great athletes bear with faulted coaches, for sure.
How do you continue to grow as a professional in strength and conditioning, as a coach, as a mentor, all of those things?
I have right at 500 athletes that come through my weight room in a day. If you're not growing with 500 athletes that walk in front of you, you're blind and deaf and probably emotionless. You're a robot. Because like, you can't help but learn from them. Like, you can't help it. There's 500 different bodies, and then every year those bodies change, and there's new bodies, and those bodies hit puberty, and like, those bodies are like, they're high level athletes where once they couldn't walk in a straight line. And so, like, high school athletics, if you're not learning, you're just not paying attention. Like, those kids teach me everything. They teach me everything. Like, why did I think velocity based training was something we should pursue in high school? Because I couldn't get a beat on their ebb and flow of their hormones, and I didn't have a way of like maximizing their performance because I couldn't figure out which athlete was walking in the door today. And so, like, that's where VBT showed up. And then once that started, I had to learn how to use it and then athletes got good. Like, imagine that. Like, we sucked. For a lot of our sports, we're bad. We were bad. And now we're like high level Division I coaches showing up on our campus trying to figure out how to get our athletes to come play for them. We got the number 4 team in the nation in basketball, women. Like, that was not true 5 years ago. And so, like, you don't figure it out, Spencer, like, you don't have a job. You're not dealing with Honda Civics anymore. And so, like, to some degree, I have to, like, it's by necessity, because I would not be giving a good service to these student athletes that are walking in my door. And a lot of what I figure out in the high school world trickles to the Olympic world. And so, like, a lot of that's happening that way. Also, just like being involved in organizations like the NSCA or the NHSSCA. People want to knock on those like they're just like letters after your name or whatever, but in a lot of ways they've connected me with coaches who are doing cool things that I hear it and I'm like, oh, we could do that. Or you end up at a conference and you get to really, like, what happens when you get to speak at a conference and you have to like really formalize these things you do, like, that teaches you a lot. And so I think just the field itself, if you care about the kid or care about the athlete that walks through your door, you don't have any choice but to get more educated or develop your craft, because you want to put the best product forward for them, because legitimately their college education could ride on it. And there are kids coming into our school that if I don't do a good job, they don't go to college. And goodness gracious, that makes me want to do the best job I can, which makes me, I think in a lot of ways forces me to always be innovative and look at like, what's the next thing, you know?
Right. Where does a new coach start? They want to kind of get into the field. W- Top two. What are the top two things that
Yeah.
they need to do?
I mean, we're doing this right now. So Blake Murphy, if you listen to this podcast, I love and hate you. Blake Murphy was been my dude. Like when I walked into Hebron, he had been there. He'd been there for a decade. Love that man. He didn't know much about the Olympic lifts. Came in underneath me, learned from me, learned from our system, and now is like, I believe, one of the better strength coaches in the state. He's going to be able to run a system. And so what happened? Well, another high school said, hey, we'd love to have you as our strength and conditioning coach. So I lost my dude because he's good. Like he's good at what he does. But what did that mean? It means that I got to hire a replacement. When we put that out there, there's a lot of really qualified people, like hyper qualified, look at the paper, talk to them. They can talk the talk and all that stuff. But what most of the applicants lacked, if not all of the applicants lacked, was a desire to come in and learn
Hmm.
and a desire to come in and like grow underneath a system and an expressed humility to do that.
Hmm.
So who do we hire? Hired Jimmy. Jimmy, no talk, no lie. 40-something-year-old man, got a 14-year-old daughter who loves CrossFit. That's the extent of his qualifications. Why did we hire him? Because that dude looked me in my eyeballs and said, hey, I just teach me and I'll do everything I can. Like I'll do everything I can to be as good. It's like if you're a young coach and you want to learn how to do it, go find somebody that's doing it and just like do more than they ask. Like do more than they think of the things that they might want you to do and do it. I did not ask Jimmy to rewrite our warm-ups, but I told him that we had to for the fall because we'd had the same ones for a year. And I got an email the next week and he'd already done them. Like that is how like if you're a young coach, go find a veteran coach. I ended up under Stan Luttrell. I ended up under CJ Stockel. I did everything I could. I volunteered for Coach Luttrell for a summer as a young 19-year-old kid and trained all his middle school athletes. Why? Because I had that man helping me do something that I couldn't do by myself, teaching me.
Right.
Go find a qualified coach, volunteer, work for less, whatever it is. Like go get underneath a coach and learn. That's the first thing. The second thing is intentionally find the thing. If you're a young coach, intentionally find the things that coach has to do that you can do already and do them. Because what you're going to do is free that veteran coach up to do the things he wants to do, and you're going to get to learn there. It's like because Jimmy already did something, like I get to go do something that I didn't have space and time to do. I get to go develop our GPS technology and our reporting for that. Or I get to go develop and try a new thing out on BBT. And Jimmy and Erica and I will get to learn from that thing where I wouldn't have had the space and time to do it. So where you may not have the space and time as a young coach to do these things that they're doing at a really high level, you can take the little stuff off their plate and let them do the high level stuff. And then what you'll get is to receive watching them do it, learning them do it, and then implementing it yourself and get to do it yourself with them. And that's how that works. And if go find a great one, get underneath them, and then do all the stuff you can for them so they can do all the stuff they want to do. If you can do that, you're the most qualified. I promise you, you're the most hireable strength coach on the planet.
Great suggestions. And I think that was really well put. I have one final question for you before I let you go. What are we missing from our coaching profession? What do we need to do to improve and continue growing the sport of weightlifting?
I think most coaches, even on your podcast, have said like we're missing connection to each other. Like we're pretty isolated, pretty silos. Like, but I don't know how to fix that. We don't have time to like all get together at some place else and like sit around and like spend 3 days showing all the world our programs. Like I think I'll just be straight. Like we're missing opportunities to invest in each other and care for each other's and learn from each other. Also, I think I'm guilty. I'm guilty of being humble enough to learn from other coaches. I think we're missing a humility piece to like recognize that you're not the only one to do it. Also, maybe bigger than that, there's 30, 40 years of coaches out there that we're not listening to. Like why in the world CJ Stockel, Stan Luttrell, Bob Morris, like those types of coaches. Man, one of the biggest influences in my life was Harvey Newton. Harvey Newton, who passed away recently, was involved in USA weightlifting in the early and late 90s. I can't even tell you all the things. At some point he was CEO, I think, or a high performance director. He was also an Olympic coach, but nobody knows who that dude is. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the more like qualified, experienced coaches out there. He taught me so much about positions and the importance of certain positions. I just think we just don't learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And when we get to the end of our career, we just fall off, right? Like we just like there's no, weightlifting. You're not paid by the governing body. So like when you're no longer putting athletes on teams, like you're really no longer valuable to the governing body. And so like as a coach, you just sort of like disappear. Mm-hmm. And all that experience and all of that learning and all of that knowledge goes with you. And here's what I know is like I shouldn't be the guy on this podcast. Like I shouldn't be it. There are people more equipped who've got literally, man, look, I've been doing this 8 years. Like they've got 4 times the experience that I do at the same level that I do of experience doing this with multiple Olympiads of athletes. Mm-hmm. I just think those voices are not, I don't know where they are. I don't know what they're doing and why can't like they come sit in my living room and tell me what to do. I just think that we don't do a great job of connecting as current. I consider myself like a young coach still. Young in career. I think I'm feeling kind of old now, but like young in career. But there are some veteran coaches out there that, man, I just don't know why their voices aren't louder, and I don't know why we aren't finding ways as a governing body to like put them all in a room and let us just let a young coach like me sit down and shut up and learn. Like take out a yellow notepad and just start scribbling as fast as I can. That's what I need. That's what we need. Like, that's what I need. More than anything else, what I need from the coaching community is to learn from the people who have done what I've done 6 times as long as me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that resonates across a lot of coaches that I've had the opportunity to talk to. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being on the podcast. I cannot wait to share that this episode probably in the next couple of weeks. And until then, good luck on the ramp up to the Olympics, and we look forward to cheering you on in Paris.
Thank you. Go USA.